realized they went out into the world and into the workforce and realized it was, not a friendly place for women due to the patriarchy or whatever.
Well, yeah, so that's standard feminist history there for you. Before the 1900s or even later, 1960s, there were no women in the world. They were all at home and kept at home by the oppression of men. It's only men that were out in the streets or out at work. Women were unable, they were closeted at home indoors, and it's only when they went out into the world to work, so just picture little kittens, and then they're inside all the time, and then they get let outside and, it's a big wide nasty world out here, or gee, I don't know what I'm going to do, oh no. And, this is standard feminist doctrine. We see it all the time with these women. There was women were not part of history at all for the entirety of the human, existence, until feminism came along in the early last century and freed women from the oppression of men, and that's where we are today. Thank God feminism came along. Otherwise, women would still be just closeted at home. No prospects, no way of getting up in the world. Or forget about the queens and all the like Cleopatra, for example. That doesn't know. None of that's relevant. No, it's Catherine the Great in Russia. It's it is a delusional world that they're living in. It has to be.
Other explanation. I mean, you could think of a lot of different explanations for this. Why do you think that women are less happy today, according to these surveys, than they were before most of the second wave and third wave feminist ideas took hold?
Yeah, so there are a number of surveys, including the General Social Survey, which is the biggest and most comprehensive and asks Americans a lot of questions about their subjective happiness. And it's been notable that since 1972, women have reported declining happiness every single year, and men have reported slightly increasing happiness, so that they've switched places. Whereas in the past, women were a little happier than men. Now they're less happy. Now, we can't, who knows? I mean, it's impossible to say what causes something so broad, but...
I wouldn't say it's impossible to say what causes something so broad, but, it's a bigger discussion than you're going to have here on the stage. Now, you've got to start off defining what happiness is, And the other thing is, it's a pursuit of happiness that is in the American Constitution. It's not happiness, and I think that's correct. I think it is. You've got to pursue happiness. But that aside, let's have a look at what you've just said, and that is, we had the feminist, I can't remember her name now, wrote the seminal work, which was Anecdotes and Junk Science, and that was to get women out into the workforce, was the main aim there. And then we had the Equal Pay Act of 1963. So that was your economic equality, which is what feminists want or wanted. Social equality, I mean, you could say having a job would be social equality, any job. That's all men have in their lives, is a job, if they're lucky. So, that's your social equality really being met there. And political equality, well, men have the vote, women have the vote. And that's equality, right? You can't, demanding that women become politicians, well, some of them have, but it's not for everyone. And, it's not for all men either. So, you've got what I'm saying here is by 1972, when women's happiness started to decline, the aim of feminism, or the stated goal of feminism, which was social, political and economic equality with men, by 1972 that had been met. The goals had been achieved. And then along came the radical feminists with their Marxist based ideology, I'll say, where they wanted to tear down the nuclear family and had the gender war instead of the class war under Marx. And what we see today, basically. They came along in the 1970s and published their blockbusters, and now you've got women less happy than men. So to say that modern feminism hasn't played a large role in the decline in women's happiness, I think, you've really got to look at where feminism is taking women. Men are fine, right? Especially MGTOW. MGTOW's happy as Larry, okay? Like we're good to go. But the average guy who's now browbeaten and married to some fucking harpy in the West, and then the divorce courts and all the rest of it. Women's happiness, they've surpassed their goals, and now they've created what is essentially an unequal society, and they should be reaping the benefit, and I'd argue that they probably are. You've got women with these totally unrealistic expectations now, and they're obviously not getting met, and so they're unhappy. Big fucking deal. Who cares as far as MGTOW are concerned? Not our problem. Like you fight amongst yourselves, women. Go on.
I do speculate in the book that when you consider what women are like, and how nature made us, and also the things that we see. So women are, for example, much more likely to be risk averse than men. Like investment advisors know that if they have a couple, that the husband's going to be more comfortable with taking a slightly riskier bet, and the wife is going to be like, I'm not so sure. So together they make a nice balance. But women are a little bit risk averse. Women are, worry more. They tell pollsters that they worry about nuclear war or nuclear energy, or they're much more worried about radical changes. So when Scotland was voting on the referendum about whether to leave the UK, women came out and voted against it, and perhaps because it was too big of a change, it was too risky. And we note that all over the developed world, women are more likely to vote for candidates and parties that want a strong safety net and lots of social supports.
Well, nice little chat there, but first of all, you've got to define a woman. And your sisters or the sisterhood is unable to do so today. It's what if I feel like being a woman today, I'm a woman. Okay, so that's where we are. That's what we're talking about. You're talking about biological women by the sounds of it, but that's not what feminism was telling us. It's if I put a dress on, I can be a woman. We've had a Woman of the Year was actually a transsexual woman. That woman had been a woman for about a year, and she got the award for it. So, as far as women being risk averse, well, you've got a bit of work ahead of you to make that statement stick. And it starts with defining what a woman is. As far as what you've said, yes, I agree with you. Women are risk averse, and they will vote for the left, which is your social security, social safety net, big government, big high taxes parties. And so will young men these days. So, what you're saying is just getting you deeper and deeper into a hole where you can't actually make any sort of headway, because the feminists have got themselves into the position where they don't even know what a woman is. So, these women want to run the world. They think that the world will be a better place if they've got 50% representation on the boards of directors of all the Fortune 500 companies. And they can't even fucking define what a woman is. And it's just getting worse and worse. So, oh, what a fucking joke you people are.
So we know that women are risk averse, more risk averse than men, and obviously there are differences within that. Some women are more so, some less, of course. These are all generalizations. But so women are risk averse. They want and need security. And that seems fairly obvious why that would be. We get pregnant, we have babies, we are kind of in need of somebody to help us out while we have young children. We need husbands or someone to help us.
Yep. So we know what that someone is. That's the big government as father, and that's been around since the 1970s. And as far as the feminism goes, men can get pregnant today. They can have babies. They have periods, and if you suck long enough on a man's tits or a man's nipples, that he'll actually produce milk, apparently. I've yet to actually see that in the real world, but as far as the feminist world is concerned, men can have babies as well. So, like what you're saying is, probably worthwhile in some fantasy world, but in feminist world, it's totally invalid. Totally invalid. You need to get back on track. You need to have a chat to your sisters, love, because that ain't what reality is today. Men can get pregnant, men can have babies, men can have periods, men can breastfeed. So what? Men got to do that on their own, or what? Like you're saying, women need help with their babies, and what about men? What about men? Why can't men have help with their babies? I mean, you've got to stay home to breastfeed, right? And men can breastfeed. So come on, get with the program, woman.
And women are very aware of their own vulnerability. And in the last 40 years, because of the changes that partly were brought about because of feminism, women are less secure than they used to be. They have more opportunities for sure, and that's great. But there's always a trade-off, and I would not want women to be denied any opportunity that they want. And I also would never say that women should all do one thing and not another, that they should all stay home and be moms, though I loved being a mom. But I am saying that for the average woman with marriage further out of reach, with a lot of young men in our society not really growing up and not taking responsibility for themselves, for their children that they father.
Now, just hold your horses there, sweetheart, just for a minute. So you got young men, young women. They're out partying, of course. The young women, they'll do things like fly out to Dubai to party with some millionaire and his cronies. And, you know what happens, what she's doing. She's they're partaking in the oldest profession when she's doing that. But that aside, so women and men party through their 20s, and occasionally there's the odd baby getting produced. The ones that aren't aborted end up with child support. And as far as men not growing up, I think you'll find that the government and the judiciary are going to force men to grow up if there's a child involved, because if you're not paying child support, you're heading to prison, and you'll grow up pretty fucking fast in prison. So there's, like, if you're claiming that women's happiness is about men not growing up, you're a fucking moron. Because there's mechanisms, the system is in place to force men to grow up when women need it. Right? The women don't have that. They don't have to grow up at all. They can drop their baby off with their grandparents and go out and party and carry on like a pork chop as much as she likes. You know, so don't say anything about women being forced to grow up, because they're not. Like, they often will grow up once they realise that they've got a baby. But as far as the man goes, there's a whole institutions forcing him to grow up fast. So just hold your horses there, sweetheart. Have a bit of a think about reality and get out of the feminist bullshit. I'll just add to that and say, not only does the government and the judiciary force that young man to grow up fast, the baby doesn't even need to be his in some cases. And as far as him actually taking on the role of father, that's not wanted. It's not even enforced. I mean, his rights as a father are not taken into consideration at all by anything. So, you know, not only is he forced to grow up as a wallet, but he's got no rights as a father. And the child doesn't even need to be his. And he's forced into it or prison.
For anything, really, not their communities either. When men don't marry, they don't assume a lot of responsibilities in life. So women are less secure, and I think that accounts for why they're less happy.
So you critique the sexual revolution a lot in this book, and so it's interesting when we're talking about men and women's happiness, right, and relative to each other. There is a school of thought that says that the sexual revolution was a great boon to men. If you think about the Me Too movement and how that started out talking about Harvey Weinstein and sort of very criminal behavior, right? He's now had to turn himself in to the police and undergo criminal trial. We started out talking about that. And the kind of conclusion, although it's still obviously ongoing, the last huge story to kind of hit, and I think that made subsequent stories more difficult to run, was that Aziz Ansari story that was run by Babe. And a line in that story really jumped out to me, right? It says, the girl is telling the reporter, I called an Uber home and I just cried the whole way home in the Uber because I felt so bad about this encounter.
Yeah, okay, so Me Too movement. It didn't start with Weinstein, all right? It was around long before Weinstein was on the radar. And Weinstein, he amplified the Me Too, right? So, like, it gained a lot of traction during the Weinstein trial. Now, as far as Weinstein goes, it takes two to tango. And those women on that casting couch, they were fucking that old fat fuck because they wanted their careers to be advanced. And it's the power of the pussy over the power of the wallet. That's all it is. Those women were not little damsels being taken advantage of by the big bad wolf. Both parties knew exactly what was going on. And as far as a woman can claim she is in the back of the Uber crying all the way home, I couldn't give a fuck. So Weinstein, you know, whether or not he got his comeuppance, I don't care. But those women got where they are today because they knew what they were doing on that casting couch. And it's been part of Hollywood since its inception. And women will still sleep with their way to the fucking top in any corporation. So, you know, stop with the damsels in distress trope. It's fucking bullshit.
I mean, we seem to be having a debate as a society about consent, and the left seems to want to push the definition of consent to be much broader than what the right would think is traditional, or the law thinks, for example, is consent. Do we talk about consent because we don't have a language with which to talk about hurtful sex?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. One of the ironies is that we are today, we have gotten to the point in our society where we have no longer linked sexual behavior with character, right? It used to be that somebody, a man or a woman who was, used other people purely for their own pleasure and was not committed, and there were all kinds of names for people like that, some names for women, some names for men.
Right, so I grew up in my teenage years were in the 80s and 90s, and sex was was like breathing. It's what you did. You go to the bar, you pick up a woman, you take her home, you fuck her, and she'll either get a cab that night or she'll make you breakfast in the morning or something, whatever. And people have been having casual sex since the dawn of time. So there's no way you're going to regulate it. There's no way you're going to stop it. Now, I'll give you a little story, okay? So I used to work I was working in IT, I'll put it that way. And there was a young tech got employed, and he earned a bit of money, and he decided he wanted to go on holiday. So he's gone on what was called a tiki tour in Europe. Now, it's for 20-somethings. They get on a bus and they cruise around Europe in this bus for a couple of weeks, stopping at hotels and sightseeing, And here's this young woman on the bus, and her aim for her holiday was to sleep with every man on the bus, whether or not they had a girlfriend, and the bus driver as well. That was her goal for that holiday. And here's the thing. She's doing it because she can, and she can do it without getting a reputation, because she's on the other side of the world, right? And she's in a busload of strangers. And she can sleep with the whole lot of them, and she did it one at a time. I think she got a couple of them in the same day, but she didn't have group sex or anything. So she could do it, and she could do it without getting a reputation, and that's the key to it. Women, as long as they have anonymity, or they realise that their reputation is not going to be destroyed, they'll do anything. It'll stagger you what women would get up to. And my advice to young men is, if you think about the most disgusting sexual fantasy you've ever had, and look at your girl, multiply it by 10, and that's what she would do given the opportunity. And that's true of every woman I've ever known. So, this idea that somehow you can regulate this or change society in this way, women have been like this since the dawn of time. If their reputation is secure, if their reputation will be intact, they will undertake whatever sexual adventure is on offer. That's just the way they are.
But it was considered a mark of bad character. And because of the sexual revolution, we sort of repealed that. But so when women were faced with situations where men were behaving in ways that were not rape or were not assault, but they were still not being treated right, and they were still unhappy, they don't have any other vocabulary that the culture gives them to protest and say, this isn't working for me. And I said last night that I quoted Jessica Valenti, who's a feminist, but when she was talking about the Aziz Ansari story, she said, a lot of men will read that and they'll say, that's a pretty straightforward, normal sexual encounter. And what they don't understand is, for us women, it's just not working.
Well, I'll admit that I don't know the details about what they're talking about here. But as far as it's not working for women, it's mainly not working for women because they're not attaining or securing resources. Oh, that's mainly why it's not working for women. I mean, you've only got to look at OnlyFans, and you've got women there, run-of-the-mill women, getting $20,000, $30,000 a month for doing what the customer wants, and they're more than happy to oblige, right? And the reason for that is they're attaining resources. That's what it's about. The woman is having sex because her hormones are driving her to it, and she's under the social pressure to attain resources. Like I've met women who will sleep with every man they meet, they have to have sex with. And whether or not the man's in a relationship, it doesn't matter. They will make themselves available to every man. I mean, one Australian girl I met, she's just gone from one man to the next. She'll have a relationship with a man and she'll fuck all of his friends, and then she'll move on, and she'll just keep going. And good looking girl, average root, and that's just who she is. She's just a woman who has to sleep with every man. I've worked with women like this. There's just some women have to do it.
And that's one of the fundamental differences. And something has gone very wrong when men have been misled into thinking that women are just as into a casual hookup as they are, and it leads to unnecessary disappointment and heartbreak, and it's not. I think that it's the enemy of love, casual sex and the hookup culture.
So let's get to the heart of your truth claim, right? Because a lot of what we're talking about is dependent on the idea that men and women are not just different in terms of the obvious physical differences, but that we're deeply different in terms of brain structure, in terms of, you mentioned risk averse, in terms of personality traits, right? Where is the evidence for the claim? So the left will say, right, that this is socially constructed, and that in fact the differences that we see between men and women on average are more due to the way that society raises girls and boys than it has to do with anything inherently underlying biological. What's your answer?
Well, yep. Just before you do answer that, let's define what a woman is and let's define what a man is, because you feminists can't have it whatever way you want. Today's world, men can be women and women can be men. And it just depends how they feel when they wake up. And that's where you are. So you're now trying to tell us there's biological differences between men and women. Now, I know there are, but I'm just a MGTOW. What do I know? Okay, so you can't just sit there and tell us there are men and women and then tell us there are differences between the two, when your doctrine and your dogma and your feminist ideals is that gender is a social construct and that it's completely fluid and you can't pin anyone down in any particular gender at all, ever. And what about your pronouns? So you can't sit here and have a discussion about the differences between men and women if you can't even define what a man and a woman is. And that's the reality that you feminists are living in today.
So, look, does culture matter? Of course, and it would be crazy to say otherwise. But is it everything? There's a lot of reason to be skeptical about that. We have abundant evidence of differences that show up between boy babies and girl babies in the first days of life, before anybody's had an opportunity to program them. So little girl babies will respond more to the sound of a human in distress. Little boy babies will respond more to flashing lights and moving objects.